How you doing, guys? Welcome back to the Kamiyama PT YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to talk about how the foot has an effect on the hip, and more granularly, how the foot, and depending on how you look at it, how it affects the hip. By knowing that, you might just have a better expansion and idea of why these are things that some practitioners or other people are looking at, and how it can affect or positively or negatively to what's going on with you. So, enough talking. I'll see you in the video. Hi, this is Kento at Kamiyama Physical Therapy. Welcome to our channel. All right, so let's talk about the foot. So if you haven't watched my foot videos on arching the foot or flatten the foot well, check out these videos in the link in description. Now, when it comes to putting it together, right, the foot inevitably has some form of relationship to the hip. Now, how we look at that will make a big difference, I believe. So let's first look at one way first, is whatever the foot is, wherever the foot is going, let's say wherever the shin is going, the hip will follow. So let's say, for example, if you flatten your foot, as you internally rotate your shin and your calcaneus, your heel, it eventually rotates the hip inwards, right? This is not necessarily a bad thing. Eventually, everything will go in the same direction, eventually. All right, so for example, I got my foot bone here, okay? So whenever you flatten your foot, the shin tends to go inwards. And if you notice, if I turn the shin enough, can you notice how the femur or the hip bone turns inwards? So that's something to look into. And the other way around as well. So if you allow yourself to turn your shin outwards, the hip also eventually turns outwards. I hope you can see it in the video here. I'll see if I can make a close-up on that later, right? So now, let's go the other direction with it. All right, so I hope you guys see the foot. So now I'm gonna move the hip inwards and outwards. So let's say I turn my hip this way, so my hip bone is going inwards. And if you look at that, how my shin bone eventually goes inwards, and if you notice, my foot flattens. And then same thing when I go outwards, when I turn my hip outwards, it eventually pulls my foot and goes into supination. I'll do it again, okay? I turn my hip inwards, and notice how my foot eventually goes into pronation. And when I turn my hip outwards, notice how my foot also arches as well. So if you have difficulty feeling how to pronate a foot or arch the foot, or you've never done this, when you think of it this way, it might be a good idea to kind of depend on another bone or a hip joint or a different body part in order to get something you want. So you notice it eventually all comes together. Now the key word here is eventually. So it's all about timing. So whenever you turn a shin bone outwards, and purely if you want to turn a shin bone outwards, right? And if you can kind of see here, I hope, see here. So if I just turn my shin bone outwards, so if I put my hip here, if I turn my shin bone outwards, if I actually allow my shin bone to go outwards, this femur, this hip bone, it needs to stay in place. So during that beginning motion that allows your shin bone to turn out, this hip bone has to maintain or stay inwards, so in relative to each other. So relative to the hip bone, the shin bone is turned out. But if I flip it, my hip bone relative to my shin bone is in internal rotation, so it's actually in the opposite direction, right? So when tissues are working, you want to make sure everything has an independent joint motion to it. So when you do everything together, it doesn't just go all like this at the same time, but it creates this kind of coiling and kind of this energy that's kind of stored that's being used to allow everything to work. So it's kind of like this spiral of energy that goes from top down. It's not everything that goes together. It's kind of everything eventually going up together. So depending how you look at it, it all matters. So if you notice that your bones kind of don't move all in the same direction at a certain point, maybe you're just not letting everything into the same direction. But if you're having trouble, if you feel like things are stagnated, maybe you're not able to create like this actual independence from each joint to allow more power to be stored and everything else. That's similar to what walking is. If you notice, if you kind of just think about walking, how your arms and legs, the opposite arm, opposite leg comes out, is to help you create this potential energy through your fascia and other tissues in your body in order for you to walk. So I hope that was stimulating and a different way to think about how the joints move and how to look at in a bigger picture. So in another video, maybe I'll kind of show or kind of give an example how it may look in different movement patterns. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a different video.